Part 1 told you who owns these cables and who is cutting them. Part 2 is about geography. 5 places where the physics of the ocean force every cable on Earth into a bottleneck. Sever these 5, and you have cut the global internet. These locations are not secret. They are on a map anyone can download. That is part of the problem. Chokepoint 1. The Luzon Strait. A 250-kilometer gap between Taiwan and the Philippines. More than 10 major cable systems pass through this single body of water. It is also the busiest submarine transit route between the Pacific and South China Sea. PLA submarines pass through here regularly. So do US submarines. Neither announces its presence. These cables connect Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines to the United States and to each other. They carry most of the Pacific's internet traffic, financial data, and military communications. Japan's entire financial system settles through them. The US-Japan Security Treaty was negotiated on the assumption that communications would remain intact during a crisis. That assumption has never been tested. Chinese military planning documents describe Luzon Strait cable severance as phase 1 of any Taiwan blockade operation. In August 2025, the Philippines opened a new military base in the Luzon Strait, the first time Manila has recognized the strait's strategic value formally. In December 2025, China deployed over 90 ships in its largest ever maritime drill, specifically simulating blockade operations around Taiwan. The cables and the military exercises share the same water. The depth here, up to 5,000 meters, means any damage is essentially irreparable for months. Repair ships cannot operate safely during a military crisis. At 5,000 meters, the water pressure is 500 times atmospheric. Existing repair equipment cannot reliably operate below 2,000 meters. A Luzon Strait cable cut during a Taiwan conflict would stay cut until the conflict ended. The U.S. 7th Fleet, headquartered in Yokosuka, runs its Pacific communications through these same cables. Military satellite backup exists, but at dramatically reduced bandwidth. The U.S. military's own analysis estimates that losing undersea cable connectivity in the Pacific would reduce operational data throughput by up to 95%. Satellites carry the remaining 5%. A cut here doesn't just affect civilians. It degrades American military response speed. At the moment, maximum speed is required. On any given day, there is no dedicated cable protection force in the Luzon Strait. The cables sit unguarded in some of the most contested waters on Earth. The Philippines' new base monitors the strait, but its primary mission is not cable protection. Taiwan's Coast Guard now patrols 24 hours a day near its cables, using radar alerts for vessels coming within a kilometer. No equivalent protection exists for the cables that connect the United States to its Pacific allies. Chokepoint 2. The Strait of Malacca, the busiest shipping lane in the world, 80,000 vessels per year, and directly underneath, cables connecting Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and Europe. 90% of China's oil imports pass through here. So do the cables China uses to communicate. With its belt and road investments in 140 countries, China has as much reason to protect this choke point as anyone, and no formal agreement with anyone to do so. The SEMEWE cable series, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Western Europe, runs through here. 5 separate systems. All of them could be cut by a single vessel, deliberately dragging anchor across a 30-kilometer section of shallow seafloor. When SEMEWE4 alone was damaged in 2008, 70% of Egypt's internet disappeared overnight. All 5 run through the same narrow passage. Singapore is the hub. Every cable through Malacca terminates or passes through Singapore, a city-state the size of a city, hosting the digital backbone of Southeast Asia. Singapore's GDP is $500 billion. Its entire economy passes through buildings that have less physical security than a mid-sized bank branch. The Malacca Strait is dangerously shallow. In some sections, just 25 meters deep. The cables run through water shallow enough for a fishing boat to anchor directly on them. There are hundreds of anchor damage incidents here per year. In a strait with 80,000 vessel transits annually, the distinction between accidental and deliberate is easy to manufacture and very hard to prove. The Baltic campaign demonstrated exactly how that works. 3 nations share jurisdiction: Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. All 3 have cable protection agreements. None have deployed dedicated cable protection naval assets. The cables are policed by the same Coast Guard that manages fishing violations. 1 patrol vessel for every 200 cargo ships transiting daily. On paper, cable protection exists. In practice, it does not. Chokepoint 3, Bab-el-Mandeb. The correct translation from Arabic: Gate of Grief, not Gate of Tears. The original Arabic is stronger. 29 kilometers wide. Every cable between Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and East Africa runs through here. 15 separate cable systems, in a channel narrow enough that you can see both shores on a clear day. Since 2023, Houthi forces in Yemen fired over 300 missiles and drones into Red Sea shipping. They damaged cables here. What has not been widely reported: the Houthis publicly stated in early 2024 that they were deliberately avoiding cutting all the cables, because doing so would isolate Yemen itself. They are using the cables as leverage, not destroying them. They understand this infrastructure better than most Western commentators. When 3 cables were cut in 2024, 25 countries lost significant internet connectivity. In September 2025, a single commercial anchor cut 4 more simultaneously. Microsoft Azure went down across 3 continents. Not a missile, an anchor. Rerouting traffic around Africa added 200 milliseconds of latency to every transaction. Enough to cost financial firms millions per day. 3 cables, then 4 more. There are 15 cables in this strait. The U.S. Navy has a carrier strike group in the Red Sea. It has not protected the cables. The military calculus: risk $1 billion warship to defend a cable that costs $50 million to repair. The math doesn't work until you factor in what the cable carries when it is cut. $10 trillion per day. The cost of not protecting it is 10,000 times the cost of repairing it. The calculation has been made. The policy response has not followed. Djibouti hosts the most concentrated assembly of foreign military bases on Earth. American, Chinese, French, Japanese, all within a few kilometers. All of them know the cables run through the water outside their front door. None of them have a cable protection mandate. 8 armies, 1 strait, 0 cable guards. The full Djibouti story: 8 militaries, 8 miles apart, no rules between them, is coming soon on this channel. Chokepoint 4, the English Channel, 33 kilometers at its narrowest, the busiest maritime shipping lane in the world, and beneath it, the densest concentration of undersea cables on Earth. The first cable ever laid under the English Channel was in 1850. A French fisherman cut it within 24 hours, thinking it was seaweed. 175 years later, same vulnerability, larger stakes. Over 40 cable systems pass through the English Channel. This is the single most cable-dense 33 kilometers of ocean in existence. A fault here happens almost every month, not from sabotage, but from trawler nets and cargo anchors. In the world's busiest shipping lane, the channel is so routinely damaged that deliberate cuts would look exactly like accidents. They always do here. Post-Brexit, this creates a strategic paradox. The UK is no longer in the EU, but its digital sovereignty depends entirely on cables, running through EU member states' territorial waters. A diplomatic breakdown could theoretically threaten cable maintenance access. More critically, the UK's intelligence sharing arrangements with Europe depend on infrastructure running through the sovereign waters of countries it is no longer treaty-bound to. Brexit cut political ties. The cables do not know about Brexit. A cable fault in the channel happens almost every month. Trawler fishing gear, cargo anchors, extreme tidal currents, the highest damage rate cable corridor in the world. The normalcy of damage here is itself a cover. Deliberate cuts would look like accidents. In October 2023, a French trawler severed a cable, carrying 30% of UK internet traffic to Europe. Accidental. The result was the same. Chokepoint 5. The Strait of Sicily. 148 kilometers between Sicily and Tunisia. The gateway between the Western Mediterranean and the Eastern Mediterranean. Arab geographers wrote about this strait controlling trade between the two halves 800 years ago. It still does. The trade is now data. 4 of the world's most critical cable systems run through here, including the SEMEWE cables connecting 33 countries from France to Japan. Cut this strait, and Southern Europe, the Middle East, and much of Asia lose their primary cable connection. The cables run through here because of physics. It is the narrowest crossing between the Western and Eastern Mediterranean. There is no alternative route. The geography has not changed in 800 years. The northern African end of these cables lands in Tunisia and Libya. Libya has had no functioning central government since 2014. The cable landing station in Tripoli is located in a country that does not effectively exist as a state security provider. The world's internet runs through a failed state, and the international community that depends on those cables has done nothing to secure the facilities. The same waters simultaneously, a migration crisis zone, a NATO patrol area, and the channel through which a third of Europe's internet data flows. The complexity of competing priorities means cable protection is always the lowest priority. The Italian Coast Guard is managing migrant boats, monitoring Russian naval movements, and sailing over cables carrying Germany's financial system. No one has told them which matters most. 5 choke points. Sever all 5 simultaneously, and you have not just cut the internet. You have removed the nervous system of the global economy. Financial markets, military communications, cloud computing, banking, all degraded or gone. The US wargamed this in 2023. The conclusion is classified. What is not classified is the RAND summary. No effective response exists on the current force posture. The New York Stock Exchange requires undersea cable connectivity to price assets against European markets. Without it, algorithmic trading systems trigger halt protocols within minutes. In 2020, when COVID disrupted markets for 30 seconds, $1.7 trillion in paper value evaporated. A cable cut lasting 30 days would make that look like a rounding error. It is not just finance, remote surgery, AI-assisted diagnostics. In 2023, 40% of all NHS consultations were conducted remotely. All of them traveled through undersea cables. A cable severance doesn't just disrupt markets, it delays diagnoses. People die from infrastructure failures. We just don't call it that. US military command and control is classified, but what is declassified tells us this. Even military satellite communications fall back on undersea cables. For bulk data transfer. In 2019, a US military exercise in the Pacific simulated loss of undersea cable access. The exercise was terminated early. The reasons remain classified. The US military is not confident. It can fight effectively without undersea cables. And right now, tonight, those cables are down there alone. No ships watching. No submarines patrolling for this purpose. The most critical infrastructure in human history. In the dark on the ocean floor, unguarded. The same as it was yesterday. The same as it will be tomorrow. Unless something changes. We don't need to theorize. We have real events. Real cuts. Real consequences. Let us walk through what actually happens in the first 90 minutes after a major cable is severed. This timeline is based on documented incidents, analyzed by engineers who were present. T0. The cable is cut. Network monitoring systems detect a loss of signal. An alarm is raised. A ticketing system logs the event. The person reading that alarm is most likely a network operations center employee on the night shift in a data center in Virginia or London. They have a protocol. The protocol does not include calling the military. T+3 minutes. The Internet's border gateway protocol begins rerouting. Traffic finds alternative paths. Latency spikes. Some connections fail completely. This self-healing is real, and it is the most dangerous misconception about cable cuts. The Internet routes around damage, so the damage feels manageable right up until it isn't. T+7 minutes. Currency traders notice price feeds from affected regions lagging. What most people do not know: the foreign exchange market is not an exchange. It has no building, no closing bell. It is a network of banks connected by cables running $7.5 trillion in trades per day. When the cables slow, the market misprices. Mispriced assets move in real portfolios. The losses are real before anyone knows the cause. T+15 minutes. Fault location testing begins. The technique is elegant and unchanged since the 1870s. The same physics Kelvin used to test the first transatlantic cable. The break is located within a few hundred meters. A repair ship is notified. The repair ship that is 1,400 kilometers away. T+2 hours. The nearest repair ship begins mobilizing. Crew recall. Equipment prep. Safety checks. Even if the ship was already at sea. Transit to a deep water cable break takes days. The cable will be down for weeks minimum. In 2008, when cables were cut near Egypt, the first repair ship took 16 days to arrive. The world waited. It will wait again. We know exactly what this looks like because it has happened. In February 2008, 3 cables in the Mediterranean were cut within 4 days of each other. Egypt lost 70% of internet capacity. India lost 60%. The International Telecommunication Union publicly stated it did not rule out deliberate sabotage. The investigation eventually concluded ship anchors in a prohibited anchorage zone. The sailors were detained, then released. The story disappeared. The cuts happened within a 2-kilometer radius of each other. Off the Egyptian coast at Alexandria, 3 cables, within 4 days. Same prohibited zone, with 2 ships from different countries, arriving at the same prohibited zone within 4 days of each other. The incident was never fully investigated. It happened 3 months before the launch of the Iranian oil bourse. The timing was noticed, never resolved. Pakistan lost 70% of international bandwidth in that incident. Banks could not process international transactions. Call centers, an enormous part of the Pakistani economy, went offline. Estimated daily economic loss, $18 million. For one country. For 3 cables. For 14 days. Scale that to 5 choke points. Scale that to 30 days. The numbers stop being hypothetical and start being civilizational. A coordinated cut of just 2 choke points simultaneously, Luzon Strait and Bab-el-Mandeb, would remove the primary connections for Japan, South Korea, India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa at the same time. These economies represent approximately $25 trillion in combined GDP, all of them losing the cable connectivity. That makes modern economic coordination possible, without warning. In the first 24 hours after a 2 choke point coordinated cut, daily financial settlement volume would fall by an estimated 80%. SWIFT, the international payment network, would shift to emergency protocols. What those protocols are has never been publicly documented. SWIFT will not confirm their existence. SWIFT will not deny their existence. The global financial system's backup plan, for the scenario most likely to destroy it. is classified. What about cloud backup? The cloud is physical servers in physical buildings, connected by physical cables. AWS East. One connects to Europe through the same Atlantic cables that go through the English Channel. When the cable is cut, the cloud does not move. The servers are still there. The data is still there. It just cannot reach you. Satellite backup exists. Starlink, with over 6,000 satellites, provides perhaps 10 terabits per second. The undersea cable network provides over 600 terabits per second. You would need 60 times more Starlink satellites just to replace what we have in the ocean today. At current launch rates, approximately 25 years to build. In 25 years, the cable network will be larger still. This is physics, not policy. Satellites will never catch up. The power would still work. The phones would still turn on. But the services, banking, navigation, communication, logistics, supply chain, everything that runs on the assumption of connectivity would fail. Modern civilization does not function offline. We discovered this in 2020, during COVID, when some digital services were disrupted for hours. The panic was immediate and disproportionate. That was a software problem with a known fix. A physical cable cut has no known fix on a short timeline. Within 72 hours, supply chain coordination begins to fail. Ships cannot receive updated routing instructions. Port loading sequences break down. In 2021, the container ship Ever Given blocked the Suez Canal for 6 days. The disruption cost global trade an estimated $9.6 billion. That was a physical blockage. The cables were fine. Imagine the inverse. Canal open, cables cut. The goods can move. Nobody knows where to send them. The Port of Rotterdam, Europe's largest, processes 15 million containers per year using automated networked systems. Manual fallback operations, perhaps 10% of normal throughput. Ships would queue for weeks. Supply chains would break. Rotterdam's emergency protocols were designed for power failures, not for a scenario where everything else functions normally. But the cables are cut. That specific scenario has no protocol. Hospitals would revert to paper records, pharmacies to manual dispensing. Remote consultations, now 40% of all NHS appointments, would end. People would die for lack of connectivity. We just don't call it that. A cable severance does not turn off the hospital. It turns off the layer of medicine, built on top of the hospital in the last 10 years. The crisis response would itself be hampered by the very thing being responded to. There is a specific term for this in military planning: coupled failure. When the system designed to respond to a crisis fails because of the same crisis. Cable severance is a coupled failure scenario. The response infrastructure is the damaged infrastructure. The last time major financial markets halted for an emergency, it took 4 days to reopen and 6 months to recover fully. A cable severance of all 5 choke points simultaneously would not be a 4-day event. And unlike 9/11, which was a shock event with a defined end, a cable severance has no defined end. The cables stay cut until the repair ships arrive. There is no other option. There is no shortcut. The world waits. This is not science fiction. Every single scenario we have described has a real historical precedent. The scale is different. The simultaneity is different. But the vulnerability is real, documented, and right now, undefended. Since the first cable was laid in 1858, humanity has never once built a serious defense for the infrastructure it most depends on. So, what is anyone doing about this? The answer is, some things too slowly, with insufficient resources, and without public mandate. The most honest summary comes from a 2023 NATO Maritime Center report. The threat has outpaced the response. That sentence was written by the institution responsible for the response. NATO established the Maritime Center for Security of Critical Undersea Infrastructure in 2023. It currently coordinates between member states. It has no dedicated cable protection vessels. NATO's entire Atlantic cable security relies on 2 British vessels. Those 2 vessels protect a network that carries $10 trillion per day. The ratio of protection cost to protected value, 1 to 7 million. After Christmas Day 2024, Eagle S, 5 cables cut. NATO launched Baltic Sentry on January 14, 2025. Frigates, maritime patrol aircraft, 20 naval drones, an AI system called Nordic Warden tracking every vessel near cable routes. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Hybrid means sabotage. A NATO official confirmed. From January to December 2025, 0 confirmed sabotage incidents in the Baltic. Then, December 31st, the Fitberg cut 2 more cables. Finland seized it the same day. Baltic Sentry works, partially. It covers 1 sea. 4 choke points remain unmonitored. Baltic Sentry is the most serious cable protection operation ever launched. It covers 1 sea. The Luzon Strait, unmonitored. The Red Sea, unmonitored. The English Channel, no dedicated cable protection. The Strait of Sicily, no dedicated cable protection. Baltic Sentry demonstrated that determined protection changes outcomes, and that determined protection has been applied to one of 5 choke points. In the United States, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency lists undersea cables as critical infrastructure. They have published threat assessments. Congress has held hearings. The most recent hearing on undersea cable security was attended by 11 senators. There are 100 senators. 11 showed up. No dedicated protection force has been funded or deployed. The tech giants are laying more cables. Meta's to Africa. Google's Firmina. Google has invested over $3 billion in new cable systems in the last 5 years. Google has invested nothing in cable protection. That is not Google's job. New cables through Bab-el-Mandeb are still cables through Bab-el-Mandeb. More capacity. Same vulnerability. That is the problem. The RAND Corporation ran cable severance war games in 2023. Conclusion: the United States and its allies have no effective response to coordinated multi-point cable severance. The window for a meaningful military response is measured in weeks. The damage is done in minutes. The full report is classified. What is not classified is this: no effective remediation was identified for the scenarios modeled. Read that again slowly. Emerging technologies offer partial solutions. Autonomous undersea drones could potentially patrol cable routes. Nordic Warden, deployed as part of Baltic Sentry in January 2025, is the first operational AI cable monitoring system. It reduced confirmed sabotage incidents in the Baltic to 0. In the 11 months between its launch and the Fitberg incident on December 31st. 1 sea, 1 system, partial deterrence. The other 4 choke points, completely unmonitored. The most frequently proposed solution: an international cable protection treaty with enforcement mechanisms, has been discussed since 2007. It has never been agreed. Russia, China, and the United States all have reasons to preserve their ability to operate near cables without accountability. The United States has not ratified UNCLOS, the primary international legal framework governing cable protection. The most cable-dependent nation on Earth has declined to sign the treaty that would protect its cables. The primary legal framework protecting undersea cables, the International Telegraph Convention of 1884, written before fiber optics, the internet, or algorithmic trading. The penalty for cable cutting under international law, a fine equivalent to about $7,000. If you cut a cable carrying $10 trillion per day, the maximum legal penalty is the price of a used car. The fine has not been updated since 1884. What actually protects the cables right now is not law. It is deterrence. The implicit understanding that a state actor cutting cables at scale would be treated as an act of war. One word, one concept, for 1.3 million kilometers of unguarded cable. Finland boarding the Eagle S on Christmas Day 2024 was the first visible crack in that deterrence, not because it failed, but because it had to be applied to a Shadow Fleet tanker, not a military vessel. Deterrence was not designed for this. Deterrence works against nation-states that fear retaliation. It does not work against a Houthi commander in Yemen, a criminal organization, or a proxy actor operating below the threshold of acknowledged state action. The deterrence model has already failed once in the Red Sea, and in the Baltic, where Russian Shadow Fleet tankers, plausibly deniable by design, cut cables on Christmas Day and New Year's Eve, without triggering a military response. The cables are cut, the deterrence holds. Both things are true simultaneously. That is the problem. Right now, while you watch this, your data is traveling through those 5 choke points. Your bank balance, your messages, your family video calls, the infrastructure that makes modern life possible, is less protected than a parking garage. When you call your bank, the voice travels from your phone, through a tower, through a data center, through an undersea cable under the ocean, through one of 5 unguarded choke points, and back. The entire system depends on no one cutting that cable tonight. The next time a government official tells you their country is prepared for a modern conflict, ask them about their undersea cable protection strategy. Ask them how many dedicated cable protection vessels they operate. Ask them what their protocol is if 3 choke points are cut simultaneously. If they do not have a specific answer, and they will not, you now know what that silence means. The silence is the answer. The world runs on cables most people have never thought about, on infrastructure that governments don't want to discuss publicly, on vulnerabilities that no one has fully solved. Since the first cable was laid in 1858, humanity has never once built a serious defense for the infrastructure it most depends on. Not in peacetime, not in wartime, not after Snowden, not after Nord Stream, not after the Baltic campaign. This is what governance looks like for the layer beneath the headlines. Welcome to terrain. Now you can see it.